Hey, this week we're talking about a topic that is kind of highly opinionated and steeped in controversy when it comes to the DIY green industry. Not so much in the professional realm, but certainly in the homeowner realm. We're talking about mulches today, the use, purpose, and types that are out there. So I will share what I know about it, what I've used, what's been successful for me, and what has not been successful for me. I'll also talk a little bit about diseases and pests as a result of using mulch. And that's all I really have for this intro. So thanks for joining me. Let's get into it. Alrighty then, welcome back. Hey, let's do a quick definition, just so we're all on the same page. You know, mulch is kind of defined loosely as a covering of the ground in a landscape environment that kind of provides a few things. Number one, insulation. Number two, reduces evaporation. Number three, it tends to, at least for the organic mulches, it tends to nutrify the soil. It also tends to reduce weed growth, and more than anything else, it beautifies the landscape. So in a simple sentence or two, that basically just about says it all. So for most everybody who has or had a home at one time or another, whether it be a owner or a tenant, many times we're familiar with the word, well, you know, I did some planting out this Saturday and got some color in, or maybe I planted some vegetables and then I mulched the bed. And that term mulching just tends to flow out of people's mouths without a real in-depth look at it. And that's what we're doing here today. So for the DIYer, I think in my experience, what I've seen is people do it not for a lot of the other reasons except to beautify. Most of the time, people mulch just as a natural process, but they're not doing it to reduce weeds. They're not doing it for water evaporation. They're not doing it for weed control. It's basically, I planted 6 boxwoods on Saturday and then I mulched the bed and it looks really nice. Well, why'd you mulch the bed? Well, it looks really cool, and then all those other ideas. So I know in my business, not only the DIYers, but also when I was contracting, I would get lots of calls for spring spruce ups, shall we say, because that's just when people get that spring fever. So they'd say, hey, can you come over and mulch the beds for me? Absolutely, I'll be there on Saturday morning. I would get there, and sometimes I would be removing mulch because it just looked like crap, or that the old mulch was so full in the bed that putting more over it would just have looked ugly. So most of the time I would rake out a small amount or a lot and then put in the fresh stuff. And it always looked really good, and that happened generally in spring. Older mulches tend to still do their job, but they tend to get kind of, shall we say, worn out a bit. They get worn out for a variety of reasons. Number one, generally the most reason they get worn out is fall leaf pickup, where you're having to go in and scratch out the beds and pick up all the leaves. We oftentimes lose as much as 50% or more of the mulch that we have in the bed. The other thing is generally in planting again. We tend to pull a little mulch out, plant something new, and then put the mulch back in, and oftentimes we lose a little bit that way as well. And then it also gets worn out from sprinklers. If you happen to have your water system on a hard water type of well or city water, oftentimes you'll get that gray or calcium carbonate white cast to the mulch as the hard water buildup starts to collect on top of the mulch, and it looks kind of unsightly. So in obtaining or buying mulch, there's 2 different ways. You can do the bagged mulches, kind of like this, or you can do the bulk mulches where you go buy multiple cubic yards of it that kind of look like this from places like this. Now, if you're looking to save $1 and you have a larger area, I would strongly suggest and urge you check out one of your local bulk material providers. Those guys are the ones that bring in lots of mulches, lots of gravels, compost, topsoils. They're very easy to find. Now, the question is do you have a way to get it from point A to point B? Most of the time, a quality place will have a delivery option. If you have nothing but a Prius And then you can go ahead and ask for a delivery charge and have them drop it right in your driveway if you want. Kind of go out there and estimate just a little bit as far as what you're going to need. Because if you come up super short and you need another yard and a half or 2 yards, you got to pay for another delivery charge. So try to get it as accurate as possible. There's really kind of a formula there. You know, it's kind of length times width times depth, and then divide it by 27. That way you'll get a cubic yard type of estimation. Very, very easy to do, and then you're a little more accurate. So will your budget be. The other option is to go bag products. And for some smaller projects that I used to do, either at Weed Patch Ranch or at customers' places, if it was just a small bed or something, I used to go down to the box stores and I always looked for the torn bags. Don't forget that. Look for the torn bags. Don't do it deliberately. Don't be that girl, that guy. But you can go in there, and if they have taped up bags and stuff, oftentimes you'll get quite a discount on them. When you're using bag products, smaller projects, I don't know what you think looks good. I can only share my opinion of what I think looks good from a barked mulch perspective, or even the bulk materials. And that is, the finer texture, the better. It looks nicer. It's more maintainable. Do you remember being in grade school back in the day? For me, we always had those big bark nuggets that were like that. You'd almost like sprain an ankle walking across them. And sometimes if the school district got a deal on them, they'd be little medium-sized ones, but they were still pretty good size. I think for rakeability, for care and maintenance, and for presentation, the finer it is, the better. The bulk materials that I used to get were probably the biggest ones, were probably as big as my thumbnail. And the smaller pieces are probably my pinky nail. And it was very easy to scoop. There wasn't a lot of fluff in it when I bought it. So if you got a big 5 cubic yards of it, it was pretty close to 5 cubic yards. It wasn't the big bark stuff when they picked it up and you got 5 yards and you looked at the pile and went, but wait. So smaller tends to yield out more cubic footage, which saves you a buck or two. So 2 different kinds of mulches as well. The organic mulches, where generally they are wood product. The type that I used towards the end of my contracting career, it was recycled wood. It was old demolition of wood products, pines, firs, redwoods, that kind of stuff, ground up into very small minutia and then sent through a food coloring process where it dyed it either a brown, a red, or a black. I can't stand the red. I'm just going to go out there right now and tell you. I think red has nothing to do. The other thing is you can have natural, like pine straw. Back east in our country, in the US, a lot of people use pine tree needles, dropped needles. It's raked up and commercialized and baled. I've seen it sold right out of the back of 53-foot commercial containers right in the Lowe's lot in North Carolina. The other kind that you can generally get is called gorilla hair, which is kind of a frizzed up thick bark of cedar or redwood products. You won't see too much of that back in the eastern part of North America. I don't know about the other continents. I don't know what you guys have. Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. Very hard, very, very hard to work with. So look for the nugget-ized type of organic mulches. So let's move on to another kind of mulch, the inorganic type of mulches. Out of all the percentage of landscapes that I've done over the years, I would say maybe 10% use this kind of mulch. And the reason why was because I was in Northern California, predominantly in a recession and in a drought at the same time, a landscaper's double whammy. And yet this mulch became more and more popular. We're talking about gravel mulches. What do I do with gravel mulches? They go down a little bit thicker. You know, instead of a little covering of 1 inch, 2 to 3 inches. They always are done over a fabric. And I know, before all the trolls come flying at me, landscape fabric does have its place. It really does. It all is based on maintenance and inspection. People say, you put that stuff down, stuff grows right through it. No, it really doesn't. Not the quality stuff. And I'll guarantee you this, if you go out and periodically check, If you have blow in over the months and years, just maintain it. Either do a little spritz or pull it out and it's fine. The finer the gravels, the better as far as maintaining it and its ability to be raked out and made really, really nice. There was one particular job I did in the town of Lathrop many years ago where we had contrasting type of rock. We had a tan earth tone river cobble and then the dark bluish gray of limestone, and we had it swirling through, and the dark gray limestone was to indicate a stream bed, so to speak. It's what the customer wanted, so it's what the customer got. Anyway, gravel mulch is just as good as organic mulch when it comes to insulation, when it comes to permeability, obviously. It also reduces the smaller size gravels, also reduce pest and diseases. It's really clean and it lasts forever. All you have to do is rake it out. Now, if you have kids, if you have doggo, if you have a crazy husband that goes out there and tends to get sloppy and kick stuff or throw stuff, and that's on you, okay? You gotta maintain it in a nice, neat fashion. In the fall, like this time of year, late September, the leaves are starting to come down up here in the north. It's really easy to rake them out. And when you rake it out, rake it so you're not pulling the gravel out over the edging or whatever you have. You're just raking it parallel and then picking up as needed. Most of the time, I used gravels slightly bigger than pea gravel, but not 1/2 inch, not 3/4, nothing like that. I did use some of those, but most of the time I used something just a little bit, it's called 3/8, and it worked out really nice. It wasn't so fine as some of the pea gravels, and yet it stayed in place. It did provide that insulation, that weed barrier reduction, and I'll give you one more tip as far as something you really want to throw one more layer of insurance as far as weed permeability. Try putting a pre-emergent down underneath your organic mulch or underneath your gravel mulch and your weed barrier. Then put those things down and you'll see that you'll have 5 to 10x as far as time goes by before you have any blow-ins coming up. Usually about 8 to 14 months or so, depending on what your situation is. Maybe a weed or two will stop popping up then, but usually not. So let's talk about pest and diseases in and around mulches. Some things do love larger inorganic mulches. A couple of jobs that I had where we had 3/4 inch and in some cases 3 inch by 5 inch river cobbles over the tops of fabric and with edgings and that kind of stuff. The larger river cobbles or large where you have spaces in between tend to become insect condominiums. They're places where the buggies can get down underneath, get out of the sunshine, still have some moisture, some protection from birds and that kind of stuff. And then come nighttime, they love to come back up. So the finer mulches that you get will prevent that. I know slugs, snails, earwigs, pillbugs, they tend to like to root down in those areas, and then come dusk or dark, they like to come back out. So be aware of that. The smaller, the better. If you have a hillside application calls for organic mulches. Unless you've tiered it up, don't use finer inorganic mulches like gravels. Nature just tends to want to put stuff down the hill. And if you have a hillside with inorganic type of mulches, I always suggest a barrier, a fabric down on it, and that's just going to make it a slippery slope. So unless you've terraced it, the hillside, stick with the organic mulch for just a natural sloped type of hillside landscape. They tend to stick on there much, much better. So for those of you who don't think gravels make a very good mulch, you ought to ask some of the people down in the desert southwest of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, those kinds of areas where organic mulches tend to be kind of very, very pricey and not available all the time. But gravels and stuff usually are. And you can use 2 to 3 inches of gravel, and you can put your drip irrigation and other stuff underneath it, staple down those tubings, and then put your gravel over the top. does a really good job. And that's another thing about mulches, is they tend to disguise other elements of the landscape and hide them from view. Drip irrigation would be one of them. Lighting cable would be another. So consider that. It's a nice professional finish. So mulches are definitely one of the elements you should consider when doing your own project. They're a little insurance policy to what? Beautify the work that you've been doing, insulate against water evaporation, insulate against the heats and the colds of one season to another, and protect young plants from transplant shock and give them a nice little nursery to get rooted in on. Besides, it just looks darn good, and it looks like a pro did it, which you can do yourself. So that's what I have for you this week. Mulches, inorganic and organic. So think about it and make sure that you get quality stuff. If you tend to go compost, make sure that you have a steam sterilized type of compost mulch. Most of the stuff that is done at recycle centers, it's kind of a crapshoot of what you're going to get. I have actually pulled out over the years hypodermic needles and other things out of compost mulches. So just be aware of that. It doesn't mean that a lot of places don't do a good job. It's just that I had a couple places that, yeah, they should be in daycare, not processing mulches. Lastly, the last thing I'd like to leave you with is most mulches start working really well at about the 3-inch depth. They do tend to compact. Even the inorganic ones will tend to sift down. You put in 3 inches, in 6 months it'll be 2.5 inch. You put in 4 inches of organic mulch, in a year it'll be 2 inches. So remember that. But usually the good benefit depth starts right around 3 inches. Now, if you're doing ground covers, plant your ground cover after you have mulched. Don't do it the other way around, unless it's weeks or months later and you're just doing an add-on. But usually I would go in and do ground cover day after I've already mulched, just by parting the place where the ground cover was going to go, do my planting, and then gently come back in, swirl the mulch around, and clean it up, pat it down, and say good night. Have a good night. One thing to avoid, take a look at this picture right here. Thank you, Maestro. Try to avoid mulching and creating the old new tree mulching volcano. I don't know who came up with this. I really don't. It's a temporary fix for protecting younger trees' barks and crowns, etc. I understand the theory behind it, but don't forget to go back come springtime and lower it down and pull it away and allow that trunk and the crown of that tree to breathe. What you're doing is you're encouraging trunk crown rooting systems, and you're not getting a good deep penetration of water in and around that new root system. Pull that mulching volcano back away from itself, and so it looks a little better, number one, because that's just not natural at all, and it will benefit the tree in the long run. That's what I got for you. Hey, don't forget, check out the website if you're interested in the book and the course, and don't forget about the plan of the week. If you have any questions, youryardcoach@gmail.com. Hey, and I'd like to give a special thanks to Hanny G, sending in their Blue Point Juniper project and a little, look coach, look what I was able to do because of your teachings. Hey, I appreciate that involvement. I really do. If anybody out there wants to do that, youryardcoach@gmail.com. I'll be glad to look at each and every one of them and comment as necessary. Thanks again, Haney. Take care. Hey, until next week, guys, to your landscape success. And as always, I'll see you next Friday. Bye for now.